Hey everyone, welcome to our Together with a Wife Like Me. We are excited to be with you. We're on a different night tonight. We were going to be on Sunday, but we switched it up on you. Sorry about that, but I'm sure you understand. Life happens. And we're so excited. We are diving into an amazing topic tonight that we all need. If you are married or plan to be married, you need to listen to this. It's kind of important. And we're diving into it with our friend. We've been with her. Some of you know her already, and maybe many of you do not. But she's a dear counselor, a sweet woman filled with wisdom, and we need to listen to what she's going to share with us tonight. So, Heather Bjur, welcome to our community. Welcome to a Wife Like Me, and we're so glad to have you. Thanks for spending time with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, if you're just joining us, grab something to write with, grab a notebook. I'm always taking notes when we have someone on because I'm learning a lot right along with you. And so why don't you just introduce yourself before we dive into our topic tonight for those of us that don't know you?
Yeah, so my name is Heather Bjur. It's not Bjur. Some folks say. People will say, Bjur, is that French?
You say, yes, it is.
Oui, oui. Yeah. And I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in group private practice at Valley Christian Counseling Center in Fargo, North Dakota. I've been there. I left for a little while last year. Now I'm back, and how many years have I been there? Is this my third? If I hadn't been gone for like 15 months, this would be my 13th year, I think. So, really love that place. So, I have a husband and 2 boys and a golden retriever and a bunch of chickens. And I grew up in North Central Iowa, and I never, ever, ever dreamed that I would be I'm kind of in rural Minnesota. I'm just like outside of Moorhead, and never dreamed that I would be living the crazy chicken lady life and loving that. So I really I was like, this is a surprise. All my college girlfriends are like, who is this person who loves these chickens? So over the last few years, I have been studying trauma more and more and more, because these days you kind of shouldn't be a therapist if you don't have some training in that. That's just my personal opinion. And so we're going to talk tonight about what does trauma do to your brain? How do you process that? And how does it show up in your marriage or in your relationships?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like I said, it's a big deal because when we don't understand this, we don't understand why what's happening is happening.
Exactly.
And then we feel like almost paralyzed at what to do with it. And so like, how do you move forward when you don't even know, you can't make sense of even what's going on?
Yep.
So
You
it's
either feel paralyzed or you feel like you're constantly fighting something, whether it's the people around you or like your spouse or significant other, or your kids, I suppose. But yeah, you're either stuck or fight. It's that whole fight or flight thing.
Let's talk about that. How does then trauma, since we're diving into it, what does that look like in marriage? How does it show up? How might it?
Yeah, well, I think it would be probably most helpful to step back just a few steps and just talk about what trauma is. And I mean, I think we can all give just a basic definition of trauma. Like it's witnessing or experiencing yourself something kind of big and awful. But there's actually 2 types of trauma. That type that I just described, like a school shooting or some sort of natural disaster, or you witnessed a family member like have some sort of horrible medical event or a death or something like that. Those types of things would be big T traumas, where it's like a big event. Something happens kind of like once, maybe twice. And those things can easily cause flashbacks, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, all of that stuff. But what I think is even more prevalent is the little T traumas. And those things are like having been bullied as a kid when you were growing up, or maybe growing up in a dysfunctional enough home that you kind of like got your physical needs met, but not your emotional, or, like those types of, you didn't get emotional needs met, or like that emotional connection with your parents. There's some form of some trauma in that, simply because it was a long lasting type of thing. Um, so that little T trauma thing could be, honestly, it could be living through a pandemic, which I kind of think we all have a little PTSD diagnosis right now, just after the past few years. So the little T things are going to be impactful, but they're either going to be things that went over the, like, maybe smaller events, but they happened frequently and over a longer period of time. Um, in comparison then to like the big T, where it's like, oh, I was in a bus crash that like rolled down a mountain, or I guess it doesn't even have to be like it rolled down a mountain. I mean, you could just be in a bus crash and that would be traumatic enough. So it can be something you've witnessed, or something that has happened to you, and or that you have learned about, like like say your close relative or best friend, or your spouse or something, had something really awful happen to them, and you learn about that. There's something traumatizing about that too. So all of this stuff, and certainly childhood sexual abuse, any sort of grooming, any sort of physical abuse of any kind, absolutely, and 100%, of course, falls into the trauma category, even if it only happened once.
Mm.
I want to be real clear about that.
Mhm.
We can have, I just want to throw that out there. We can have church trauma and like legalistic religion trauma type of stuff too. So actually I deal with that quite a bit in my practice. It's something, as strange as this sounds, I actually kind of love working with that stuff, because I think it's so important. So, so what happens in trauma then is that the normal information processing system that our brain naturally goes through, the way that God wired our brains to work through the things that happen to us, it gets plugged, or stopped up, or it just gets stuck. I like to give the example of, like, if your brain is just normally processing things along. Do you remember the movie? And now I'm going to blank on the name because I'm live. I'm going to blank right now. It was the little girl from Minnesota, and it was the 5 emotions, and they all had different colors, and they ran her brain.
Oh, it's one word. If
I
you're
think
watching,
so.
help us out. What's it? Isn't it one word? It's one word. I see the cover of
It
it.
right. We'll figure it out. It'll come to me in a minute. Inside Out.
That's it. Oh, 2 words.
So Inside Out, the movie, if any of you have seen it, which you probably have, there were some scenes where thank you,
Good job.
Angela, thank you, and Tracy, thank you for that. There were some scenes where the memories were these little colorful balls that they called memories, were stored in these shelves, and I remember her running by them, in her mind. I guess she was in her brain, and I guess it was the emotions that were in her brain. That's what it was. And they were neatly stored and filed away, and it was like, yep, these are fine, and you can access them, and all of that. So I feel like that's a really sweet and cute example of what like normal information processing systems look like in your brain. Your brain just processes the information and files it away, processes the information and files it away, and you can recall it, you can put it away, you can kind of make choices about that. But with trauma, if you think of those memory balls, if you want to call them that, with that, it's almost like they get stuck, like clogging a toilet or something. They don't go through the normal information processing systems. This information, the memory of the event happening, they get stuck. And that is because it is a highly emotionally charged event. And because of that high emotional charge, our brain, doing what God, designed it to do, kind of goes on like fight or flight mode. It goes into like survival mode. And we'll do just a little bit of brain anatomy here. But tucked way in the back of our brain mass is a lovely little almond-shaped piece of our brain called the amygdala. You've probably heard of it. Amygdala is the Greek word for almond, which I think is kind of fun. But that amygdala is totally based, Like it stores memories completely based on emotion. So if you are experiencing something today that is really upsetting and it feels like something that happened 5, 10, 20 years ago, your amygdala is referencing a memory that is only attached to feeling. It is not attached to time and space.
Mm,
Like it doesn't realize that this thing happened 20 years ago and that you are literally actually safe right now. It just feels your amygdala feels or it recognizes that familiar feeling. Okay, this feels scary and unsafe and awful, or like it could be awful, just like that thing did 20 years ago, except your brain might not know because like I said, it's not connected to time or space, that you're safe right now and you're actually not in any danger. So you may experience some of those like kind of like PTSD symptoms, like you want to freeze, or you want to fight against something, and that's just your amygdala being an amygdala, but it probably means that there's some unprocessed trauma back there. And
mm,
so what happens then is once that amygdala gets lit up, it just kind of takes over the rest of the brain. Your brain gets so flooded with the chemicals and the hormones and all of the stuff that happen in those really highly emotionally charged moments, that are the front part, the prefrontal cortex, where all of our like decision making capability and like reasoning and like, okay, so if I do this, this bad thing could happen, so maybe I won't do it type of thing. We're able to make informed decisions from there. And that's why they say full maturity doesn't reach, or people don't reach full maturity until like 27, 28 these days, because that prefrontal cortex just doesn't get fully developed until then. So the amygdala freaks out, the all of the hormones like basically turn off your prefrontal cortex. So you can't like think your way out of a cardboard box at this point.
mm,
And so that's when the survival mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn all can come into play at that point. We can't really like reason with that
mm.
moment. We can't reason with our amygdala. We can't like talk ourselves out of it in that moment because it feels like that awful thing that happened. So if you've ever heard of that, the phrase like "I flipped my lid," like that's a really good analogy for what happens. Like so
Mm,
if you think of the brain, like if I'm getting in front of the camera, because if this is our amygdala inside our brain, and the amygdala gets charged in there, it goes whoop, it kind of flips the lid, and then it like totally blocks out the prefrontal cortex, and then we're
yeah.
just kind of like a deer in headlights. It's kind of like that type of thing. So I wanted, go ahead.
I just have a question. So, like, when I hear you say that, what I hear you saying really is that all my problems in our marriage are no, but for real. Like it took me a really long time and I'm still working on essentially like what you just described, except for I feel like it's associated with um like the little traumas, right? Like the little T traumas in my life where it wasn't like this, oh my land, no one could like say, well, although there were some maybe big ones in there, but whatever.
Sure.
But like my I've heard it used that they're like we have pathways to pain. And so like for me, it might not look like, oh, that thing is unsafe or what you just said feels unsafe. But for me, it something small, seemingly small, could like it's almost like there's a pathway associated with these little things today
There is.
that lead me straight to that result, like
Yep,
that negative thing that
yep.
because I already have that pathway there
Mhm.
that's been so, like, paved out in the past that that's the first place I go. So even if
Yep,
it's not like a big thing
yep.
and I don't yet externally flip my lid, inside, I'm like absolutely flipping my lid, like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's what that meant. Oh, that's where he went with that. Oh, that's why I'm not good enough," or fill in the blank, you know?
Right.
And, yeah, so that sucks.
It does suck.
But it's taken me a long time, and I'm still, like, recognizing these things that,
Absolutely.
whoa, that my association with this is so strong that that's the first message I'm believing or the first place I go, or
Yep,
it's so important that we begin like learning this.
yep.
Um, Anyway, keep whatever. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember.
no, that's really good, and honestly, like, that's a really good word for it. It's pathway because what you're describing is a neural pathway. And I talk about neural pathways with clients because when people are stuck in negative patterns of thinking, which are often from especially like little T traumas, like if you got bullied as a kid, or if you had a parent who was just kind of always naggy, or like kind of picked on you or whatever, like that, those things stay in there. Um, And so those neural pathways we now know can be changed. Like that's the beauty of like how God made our brain, and that's called neuroplasticity. Our brains are shapeable and moldable, and maybe you've had folks talk about that before, but I just think it's amazing. Like we know this now. We didn't know this a number of years ago. And so literally I think of a neural pathway like, if you take your kid to the park and the regular pathways are like the sidewalks, well then like you can create your own pathway through the grass because it's a shortcut. Like there's always a couple of those because it's like, oh, you want to go straight to the swings and not down this way to the slide first or whatever. And so literally you have to choose when you notice yourself thinking those negative thoughts, or like something that feels like that icky thing that you mentioned, to notice, because that's the first challenge, like because most of those thoughts come so unbidden. They just like happen, you know it's
So
just like boop,
subtle.
right
Yeah.
there. So I didn't ask for that. I didn't think it, like, even of my own accord. It's so natural, but that's what a neural pathway is. It's just a natural path of thinking.
And and woo, I'm like, duh. But what you just were talking about is like that it's like the amygdala is feeling. So like for me, it's not, I don't notice that I'm thinking something typically. I notice that I'm feeling something first.
Yes,
Before I'm
yes.
even thinking anything, I feel something.
Yep,
Then I'm able to even think about what it was that I'm even thinking. But I'm like,
for
I'm
sure.
feeling something
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
Anyway, I don't know
And I
if
think
that's
that's especially common for women to notice the feeling before the thought. I think that's really normal. Yep. So after you notice and you're like, "Whoa, I don't wanna go down that negative path," you get to choose then to go down a different path. And so I like to say that, when we choose enough times not to go down that old path, the grass grows back in, and it doesn't look like a path
mm,
anymore.
mm,
And, maybe you travel down it every so often, but it's not something that, is just so automatic. And so we do have a lot of choice, but when there is truly trauma associated with those things, then we need to do probably a little bit more to get that neuro pathway kind of mended up.
mm.
We can talk about that a little bit more too. But I wanted to talk about like what trauma is and how it affects us, so that it makes a little bit of sense then, like how we get triggered with our spouses, or how like different things kind of make us flip our lid.
Yeah. So, like, and thank you, Sean, for taking women. Please take your friends, share this with them because you don't know who this is going to help. But what about like, what does it look like? Or because obviously you're working with couples, they're coming into you to see you, and I'd bet that most of the time they don't even know that what's causing that is associated with some type of trauma.
For sure.
So what like, if you're gonna go into the ER to see the doctor, you're gonna say, "These are my symptoms. I'm dizzy. I have a fever," or whatever. What are the are there typical things that kind of usually play out for couples?
Well, I don't know that there are typical things like across the board, but there will be typical things per couple. And so
Mm,
a lot of times, I'll kind of hear like the highlights of the things that they get stuck on or whatever. And
yeah.
then I'll ask like, okay, so when he says or does this, what does that, like what does that feel like inside of you? And has that feeling ever happened before?
Mm,
And so oftentimes, I mean, people are often aware, of this stuff, and they'll be like, "Well, yeah, it does feel like this blah blah blah, that happened back in 7th grade or something like that." And I think that it can sound even a little bit cliche, like, "Oh, here's some childhood trauma, some wounds to just like mess with you," but it's just the truth. It's just how it
yeah,
goes. And and if people wanna poo-poo it or whatever, they should certainly can, but, like, it's just this is fact.
Mhm.
This is what happens. This is how couples get stuck. Um, I will even like personality differences and stuff like that. I'll watch people who grew up in like vastly different homes and be like real, you know how opposites attract, that whole thing. But then a lot of those deeply ingrained personality differences can sometimes be based on, like the way we were raised and different traumas and things like that. And then they start to rub
Mm.
against each other, and it just almost becomes, excuse me, like another one of those neural pathways. And it's like we just kind of do this
Mm.
thing over and over and over and over and over and yeah, it's just like
Wow.
maddening,
It's
maddening.
almost just like it becomes like how they're even interacting. Like the
Hmm.
pathway is just their even basic interactions can be unhealthy,
Yeah,
and then you also
right.
yeah.
So I think maybe I'll share just a little story from my own life. So I grew up in a very talkative, very, very open, communicative family. My goodness, I'm
Oh, you're
excuse
good.
me. And my mom was and is, I guess you could say, I guess you would call her a people pleaser. Probably like another more clinical term for that would be codependent.
Mm.
My dad is pretty outspoken. I wouldn't say he's like, I mean, he's not going to go like pick a fight with somebody. That's not him at all. But he's, uh, he's going to get involved in the conversation that he's in and, give his opinion and say things like that. Whereas my mom might not be that person. And so I got used to this pattern and I didn't even know it. I got
Mm.
used to this pattern of my dad would tease my mom,
Mm.
and it would be, I mean, in many ways pretty benign, but then it could get a little like kind of not nice. And she just kind of took it. And I watched this thing happen and this dynamic. And I'm not trying to throw my dad under the bus or anything like this. Like we've had conversations about this. It's not something that's like, oh, dad, whatever. But I grew up with this like subtle um relational style where I thought, and I can articulate this now. I wouldn't have been able to probably 25 years ago. But like women got picked on. Women, like it
Mm.
was like, well, if the husband says something kind of icky about the wife, like she really doesn't have a leg to stand on and she just has to take it. Well, I wasn't about to do that. So I would get immediately like defensive if my husband would tease me about something. And as an only child, I don't do teasing well anyway. And so of course my husband has to be like a middle child and be like the instigator of all the things. And so like that was a huge thing for us though. And is it related to trauma? I don't know. There's some dysfunctional relating in there. I mean, we can call it, like some relational trauma, I suppose. But I think it gives a good example of like I was used to this pattern of relating, and so when I experienced it in my marriage, I fought against it hard. I
Mm.
was like,
Yeah,
I am not going to be made fun of or teased or anything like that because I am not less than you. And I am, all these associations that I'd made in my mind about what that must mean. I mean,
yeah,
none of this were ever said out loud.
right.
Good heavens, my father's mother was a PhD teaching in college in the 1940s. I mean, my dad is like totally respects women for some
Yeah,
reason. He just kind of picked on his wife.
yeah.
So it's just none of these things were said out loud, but it was just like I made the association. Well, if a man picks on a woman, must mean she's less than. And I was like, ain't no way I'm doing that. So then my husband and I would get into these like, because I would think he was constantly picking on me.
Yeah.
And then I would be defensive, and defensiveness just that doesn't go anywhere in a relationship.
Mm.
That doesn't breed good things. And so we struggled for a number of years early on,
Yeah.
and finally we were able to work through that. But boy, that
Oh, I
stuff is just wired.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that example because it makes me, I think it helps us like, see that it's not always, um, how do I say this? It's almost like you had been hardwired to be hypersensitive to
Yeah.
like not going down that path. Like, no, I will not be that almost. It's like,
Right. Right.
Mm, I've experienced that as well, where it's just I have the way I've explained it to myself and my husband is like, I feel like I'm a bit, and he helped me see this, like almost hypersensitive to certain things
Hmm.
simply because like do not want that at all, or like to be a part of us, or like,
Yeah,
it's almost like we develop this way of relating to our spouses when we are just trying to avoid certain things, or
sure.
like protect ourselves from even the hint of something, and
Yep.
I think it's helpful, to for at least my husband, when he said, Amanda, he's made statements like, I don't think that was outside the range of appropriate.
Normal.
Or yeah, like, like he's like, I don't think I said anything that, should result in the reaction you just gave me. I'm like,
Sure.
you know?
I'm so offended.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm even
yeah.
more no. But, like, it is true that it's not always that we are going to some negative thing. It can almost be like a protection thing,
Mhm.
or but yeah, that's why I liked that example. So
Yep,
that's
for sure.
cool. Yeah. Um, so then how about, okay, when we're triggered in marriage, you said is the same process like what you would say to do? You said to notice it, to choose to go down a different path, right? Those are the two things. Is that how in marriage, when we notice we're triggered, when we're feeling like ugh, or something, then we can notice it and choose to be like, okay, that's maybe not true. Maybe this isn't appropriate given what he just said or did, or is that how you help couples move forward, or
That's one way. Yes, that's one way because there is something really sweet about folks who can even just begin to understand that that they and their spouse like there it's not that there's something like totally wrong or dysfunctional or whatever, but there's just a very basic reaction that is happening inside the brain, and it's like not really anybody's fault, at least not anybody in the room,
yeah.
and so that also helps to be able to sort of put the problem outside of the relationship,
Mhm.
and if both people are compassionate people, which I hope they are, that's not always the case. Sometimes, like, say if it's the woman who gets triggered by whatever, if like he'll even I've seen men, like, hey, like, is this one of those things, did I just trigger you with, and just like offer something to sort of like stop that it interrupts kind of what's the snowball effect or whatever,
Mhm.
kind of interrupts the process. And for him to be able to say, hey, is this one of those times where you feel like things are just going out of control, whatever the thing is. If she's not able to, I mean, that's pretty huge. I think that's really
Yeah,
generous.
yeah.
But the even more so, when there's like truly unresolved trauma from the past, um, they're gonna need more than just these kind of like 101, types of things. And because truly trauma, it causes us to have trust issues,
Mhm.
and we tend also often tend to, when we have unresolved trauma, we often uh, sort of gravitate towards folks who poke that trauma,
Mm.
because there's this sort of subtle brain thing going on underneath the surface that says, I want to work out all of my childhood issues in my marriage so that I can feel clear and resolved and whatever. And so we all kind of have this desire to, all kind of get attracted to something that was like wrong in our lives,
Mhm.
that because we want to fix it. And so that's why a lot of times, like, say, women who have been in sexually abusive, like childhood sexual trauma and things like that, will end up with like sexually demanding husbands and different things like that, and
Mhm.
then feel like obligation sex. I'm thinking Sheila Gregoire right now, and um, it's just weird how those things just kind of, it's almost like we wear little tags on us that say, hi, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and hi, I'm a narcissist, or whatever, and let's get together. It's just it's weird how
Yeah.
common those types of dynamics are, and it's not just that either. That was just one kind of stereotypical one.
Mhm.
But so trust issues, sorry, I'm kind of going off rabbit trail here.
No, yeah.
Plus there's just mood disorders. When you've got unresolved trauma in your life, it causes anxiety and depression and flashbacks and sleeplessness and all of the things. Maybe it messes with our appetite. Maybe it messes with our even like our ability to sleep at all. Maybe there's so many different things that trauma can do. Maybe we have really horrible nightmares. Maybe I don't know what. Trauma and certain memories, they can be triggered by anything. It could be triggered by a smell, by a sight, a building, a tree. I don't, like there's just anything that sort of like is like boom. My
Yeah.
brain sees it. There it is. Oh, and then it's just, it can go,
Yeah.
it can spiral.
Yeah.
And so like those triggered reactions then, like say there was someone was locked or held hostage in a store or something with their mom and their brother when they were a kid, and maybe there was some certain smell that happened in there, and so they could be just going through life and here's that smell. Maybe it was Target when they used to have popcorn in the store or something, like they used to pop popcorn, maybe, and every time they smell popcorn, it's one of those things. But then when those triggers happen, then we have these big strong reactions, and then when we have those big strong reactions, then we butt heads with our spouse or our kids or whoever's kind of triggered us.
Mm.
But we're going to need more than just kind of those cognitive behavioral things that I mentioned earlier. We're going to need some like good body integrated stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with EMDR.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. I got trained a little over a year ago. I'm super glad to be able to offer EMDR. If you don't know what EMDR is, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what it does is the kind of the initial way that it was discovered was through like the eye movements back and forth activates the two hemispheres of the brain, which then just kind of opens up that information processing system that I talked about earlier. And that way, those stuck memories can start to be freed up. Then they can kind of be, filed away or whatever. Now, is that something that just happens in like one session of EMDR? Well, occasionally, but oftentimes it's several. And depending on the level of trauma, it could be, probably a couple months worth. But
Mm.
it's not something that takes like forever and ever and ever, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited to be able to offer that. There are other forms of what is it called? Accelerated resolution therapy, or I'm kind of blanking on it. It's ART is what is the acronym. And there's another gal at Valley Christian Counseling Center that offers that, Kristen Charbonneau. And although I know you've got folks not just from around here, you've got folks all over the place here, but somebody says, I need that. Oh, I think we all need that. We totally all need that. I've gone through some sessions. It's so good. It's so good. And so that's really what can help resolve some of that icky old stuff that just kind of lingers around. Other things include, honestly, yoga. Yoga is huge.
Mm.
They say that yoga is one of the most effective, like non-clinical forms of treatment for trauma.
Wow.
I know, right? Isn't that amazing?
Mm.
And I know a lot, some folks in the Christian world have some opinions about that, each to his own, but I've heard so many experts talk about this.
There's also Christ-centered yoga.
Yes.
Hello.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And any way you can get your body involved at the time, because what happens when we go into like those triggers or those flashbacks or whatever, we're so stuck in our heads with the memories of things. It's almost like we're disconnected from our bodies. So if
Mm.
we can, they call it top down. If we can get down into our bodies in those moments and get reconnected, then that helps us to sort of integrate and move through and calm. If we even just learning some great like relaxation techniques. I often talk to folks about progressive relaxation in terms of like laying in bed at night if they can't sleep, just like tightening the muscles in the feet, feeling, holding it for 5 seconds, feeling what those tight feet, the muscles feel like, and then releasing, feeling what that feels like. And then the next the next group of muscles. So like the calf muscles. So then, squeezing those calf muscles as much as you can, hold for 5 seconds and release the calf muscles, feel what it feels like to be relaxed and released, move up to the thighs, move, you progressively, move up, get to the top of your head, and then go right back down if you're still awake. And so it's just ways of getting our body to kind of chill out at the same time to relax, because when we're in a relaxed body, it means we will then have a relaxed mind. You actually cannot qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD when all of the muscles in your body are relaxed.
Wow.
I know, right? I took a training to become a certified trauma clinician this past fall. And that was one of the things this guy kept saying over and over again. When we are in trauma, we tense. And that
Mhm.
actually, like we hold our breath, we close our, whatever the thing is, we clench our fists or we tense up, whatever that, think about a car accident, um, and that actually helps solidify the trauma and keep it stuck when the
Wow.
muscles are all tense. And so learning to relax, learning to let things move. Another thing is if you can find an OT or a PT who does
Mhm.
myofascial release,
Mm.
it's like I have a gal that I go to and it's like magic. It's so good. Myofascial release, specifically John F. Barnes form
Mhm.
of myofascial release, but there's lots of folks around the country who do that too. And it just helps to move stuff around the body and get things
Wow.
relaxed and loosened up. And yeah.
That's so good. So I'm thinking that there's like people with us watching right now, and I'm just hunching, like throwing it out there. I'm guessing, like if you're here watching, you're invested, you're kind of curious about like, okay, what are they talking about? What can I do as a wife? Like, am I triggered by certain things that my husband does or that happen to me or situations or whatever? You might also be thinking, after listening to Heather, you might be thinking, okay, I'm pretty sure my husband has some stuff. Okay. Obviously, if you talk to him about that, he might be very willing to go to a counselor for whatever therapy they might suggest, right? Um, what do you suggest for the wives who are married to husbands that are either like in denial that they've got some sort of, they're whatever the situation is, they're completely defensive about things, they're unwilling to work on stuff, they get angry easily at certain situations, whatever that looks like in their marriage, if they're unwilling to like dig into that issue, what would you say to that wife?
Well, first of all, I feel like that response sort of like solidifies the fact that there's you trauma back there, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
And also I just want to say I empathize deeply with you. Not only was there a period of time when I experienced that in my marriage, that and it was just one of just the absolutely most maddening things I've probably ever experienced. But also, I just work with a lot of folks who, and I hate to say it, but stereotypically, it's the guy. Is it the woman sometimes? Yeah, sure, but like more stereotypically. Let me throw a book recommendation out there. This fellow is not a Christian therapist, but he is phenomenal. His name is Terrence Real, and it's spelled like real, like the real every REAL, sorry.
Yeah.
And he's a marriage and family therapist in Boston. And the book is called I Don't Want to Talk About It. And it's like, I think the subtitle is like Uncovering the Secret Legacy of Male Depression. And
Mhm.
so I feel like that's just that was a game changer in my practice and in my own marriage, because gosh, I think especially around here in the upper Midwest, like there's so many folks who came from, farm families, with these like stoic Scandinavian backgrounds, or you pull yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever. That's, like the phrase we all say.
Yeah.
And it's just like no emotions were ever tended to. There wasn't, it was just like work, work, work. I just see that so much.
Yeah.
And even like almost a legalism about emotions, like, oh, I don't want to compliment my kids, they might get a big head or something like that. Wouldn't want them to think too highly of themselves or whatever. And um yeah, so I just see a lot of really, I almost want to see like sad situations where oftentimes men just haven't been equipped to even understand what's going on inside of them. And
Yeah.
that is just excuse me, devastating to me.
Yeah.
Because we there's so much out there. There are so many resources now. There's so much. I mean, we know so much more than we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. But what would I say? So first of all, there's that book, and it's specifically depression, but I think if you've got a husband who has some trauma history, he's gonna most likely have depression.
Mm.
Um, and depression in men looks really different than depression in women. If you look at like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the way that the thing, big old honker that we use to diagnose folks, the diagnostic criteria for depression is largely based on women. Whereas, which is
Mm.
really strange because, most of the other criteria in the world for medical issues is based on men. But it's really interesting that, because men didn't really go and get attention, they wouldn't go to the doctor or whatever, traditionally speaking for that. So I feel like there's probably a lot of undiagnosed depressed guys running around out there, and they're going to look like workaholics, alcoholics, rageaholics,
Mm.
checking out on whether it's, gaming or
It's
even just
phones.
the
Yeah.
phones, sitting in front of the TV with the phone in front of their face, or maybe just like out in the shop all the time, out in the where, the man cave, whatever. Um,
Detached. Detached.
detached,
Yeah.
yep, not present. That's just one of those things that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, there is help, and so I think you have to approach this from a really compassionate and oftentimes really factual place.
Yeah.
I feel like oftentimes men will respond better to, like, hey, I heard some statistics about blah 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 the other day, and she described what this was like, and it sounds like you, and you seem like I'm kind of worried about you, and that type of thing. I think if you come from a place of like just really sincere compassion, that's probably going to be your best bet rather than anger, which is probably happening anyway. Like if you've got just a really bottled up guy, you're probably angry too, which is understandable.
Yeah.
So compassion, like there was a point in my marriage where I had to ask my husband to be treated for clinical depression, and I just looked at him and I said, I need you to do something. I can't live like this anymore, and you have got to be miserable. And then finally, when I said, you have got to, like, you're miserable, he's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
And so, you just have to, there's something about if they detect any sort of like, this is just Heather's opinion here. But if there's any detection of judgment or like, or she knows better, like that type of thing, I feel like that is oftentimes a turnoff. But
Mm. It doesn't
yeah,
invite maybe, like you say, that compassion, understanding of like, not only like I'm not coming at you to fix you this or like you
yes,
need to stop or I need
exactly.
to blah blah blah. It's like
Yes.
I see that you're hurting. I see that you're not enjoying this or that you're
Yes.
on. That makes my heart break and
Yes, exactly. One
oh,
another thing is, sometimes we need to kind of gather some information before we present it to them. And by information, I mean information about them.
mm,
Like there was a point where my husband had stopped taking his antidepressants for a while, and I had noticed he just was extra checked out and like just kind of extra crabby and whatever. And then I realized like the whole container was like still full of his meds. And I was like, hey, so I see this. I see that your meds, it looks like you haven't been taking your meds, but also like you just don't seem like yourself. You seem extra crabby, extra whatever, because I'd been noticing, like it wasn't just like one day I was like, oh, you just seem
yeah,
crabby today. It's more like, no, this has been going on for a while.
yeah, yeah. That's
Or
so
and the
helpful.
kids notice, like sometimes if you can throw one of those in there too, if the kids notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're so funny. But for real though, like that's a thing. And yeah, that's really
Yeah.
helpful because it's not an easy thing. Like we can get on here, we can talk about things, and the reality is some of us might be married to someone who that doesn't work for them or that approach, it's not that simple or
Yeah.
or whatever. There might be other things going on behind the scenes. You're like, that didn't work for me or whatever.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
again, like we are always here at A Wife Like Me, always encouraging counseling all the time. I still go to a counselor because I need it. Um,
Me too.
yeah, and so if at the very least you can go. Like at the very least you can go to learn just like what we're talking
Yes.
about. Like how should I deal with this? What should I like what do I do,
Yep.
to help like have someone so wise help you navigate through that through prayer and processing and all the things. So
Absolutely.
no,
Maybe there's more healthy boundaries that you need to draw. If there's a case, if you're in a situation where things are even dangerous emotionally, like I think that there are times when a separation is a very healthy thing. And I don't typically think of separation as a stepping stone towards divorce. I see separation as very much can be used as a very healthy tool for
yes,
reconciliation if it's done right and if it's done well and sort of like executed judiciously, like with
yes,
certain goals and time limits and things like
yes.
that.
Yes, I've seen that as well, and, I've seen it really turn hearts back to the Lord and each other,
Mhm.
so yes, and that too is so, like, a counselor will help you navigate all of that, so,
Yep.
um and we've linked Heather in the comments. If you scroll up, you'll see her website, heatherbjur.com, and she also has a free journal resource. It's journal prompts for people pleasers. So go get that. That's on her website. And it's also linked in the notes or in the comments below. Whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you should see those. Um,
I have a little podcast too.
yes.
Um, I don't know if that was clear on the website, but I haven't done anything with it for I don't know, maybe a year and a half. I've got about 12 little episodes out there, but it's super fun and I do want to get back to it someday. But it's called If I'm Honest, and it's
Mm,
all about emotional honesty. And like, I mean, there's a bunch of different topics like about codependency and how do you reconnect with a spouse when you've just been in a season of disconnection um and even just like how do you deal with your feelings about God, how do you deal with like if you have
mm.
negative feelings towards God and things like that with emotional honesty in that direction. So it's on Apple Podcasts and all the other places you can find
Awesome.
podcasts.
Awesome. And yeah, just thank you. Like this is so needed. And if you're watching, I encourage you again, like take a friend or share this with them. Everything we do, again, I said this earlier today, we get comments, emails from wives, and almost every single time they'll say, a friend sent this to me, a friend shared this with me, a friend tagged me or whatever. That's how you help someone else's marriage, and you have no idea who needs it. So, all of Heather's resources are there. If you are in North Dakota, are you licensed in Minnesota or North Dakota?
Mhm. Both.
Minnesota, North Dakota, you can get in at Valley Christian. And again, just that's all on her website. She speaks as well, correct?
Yep.
So you can bring her in if you have a church, retreat, gathering, workplace, mental health issues. I mean, she's your gal. So check that out at her website.
I wanted to offer a couple book resources too, and I'm afraid it's going to be backward. Oh, is it backwards?
It's not, I don't think.
It's not. Oh, well, look at that. Okay, so this is probably like the number one, um, kind of like this is the go-to book these days is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. If you ever get a chance to listen to him talk, he's fantastic. He's Danish. Danish? Yeah, Danish. And he's probably, I don't know, 70 or 75 or something like that, and swears like a sailor, and he's just a hoot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so you can he's got stuff on YouTube and whatever. But then another one, this is just a gold standard, Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. This has been around for a while, and he's got several. Peter Levine has several books, trauma related books, and there's getting to be more and more good ones out there. This is a good time to be alive to deal with all of the yuck. There's good resources.
Yes. And like you say, I was just listening to a podcast about the trauma of COVID and that we don't even realize like the trauma we've had. It's and like the result for so many of us is like we don't, which is also fascinating, which we should totally talk about sometime, is that like for a lot of churches, and this is not on topic, but it kind of is. Pastors will say like, you just need to get back into church and blah 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 blah, right? And although it's like super well intended, many people are like literally so like the result for them is that I literally like do not have the capacity to be
Yeah.
with people or to show up. And so
Yeah.
they are being fed at home. It's just that like we have to grow in compassion, like
Yes.
in this season for what
Yes.
people have been and are going through. On top of, I mean, you add that trauma on top of whatever else they were already dealing with. And so
Exactly.
it's just there's so much room to grow and um
Yeah,
yeah,
I love how you said that. We just need to grow in compassion.
yeah,
Like, absolutely. The
yeah,
stuff that used to work or even, like, sort of seemed to work,
yeah,
that probably didn't anyway, but it just isn't, things are just different now.
yep, yep, yep.
Yep.
So, Heather, thank you so much.
Thank
Before we say
you.
goodbye, would you mind praying over the wives, the marriages that we'll watch and are
Yeah.
watching?
Yeah, I would love to.
Okay.
Father, I lift up the women that either are or will be listening, to this conversation and any other conversation that Amanda's having in her ministry. And Lord, I pray for the relationships, that are behind those women. Um, I'm thankful that you are the knower of all things and know their situations deeply and intimately, that you see, that you're the God who sees them, and that there's really nothing that you miss, even though sometimes it can feel like it. And so, in those moments, God, if it feels like they're being missed by a spouse, by a significant other, may they find that you don't miss them, you see them, that you are there and you meet them, and that you protect them, that you uphold them with your righteous right hand. And Lord, I pray that trust could grow, not only with you, but also with others, where healing takes place from, past issues, past traumas. May there be help for husbands who need it. May there be open hearts, when a wife needs to say something to a husband. May there be a chance, for him to hear, even if she doesn't think he will. Would you be working and healing, because that's who you are. You're the healer and the restorer of all things. And there's redemption, in every icky circumstance. And so I pray that over these ladies, over their marriages, their families, and ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Heather. We appreciate you and your wisdom and your time pouring into us. And ladies, thank you so much for being with us. Our free resources to marriage resources are linked, and you can find everything at awifelikeme.com, our podcast as well, book. So thank you for being a part of our community. We'll be back on Sunday with Jennifer Taylor Wagner. I don't know if you know who she is yet, Heather, but she's phenomenal.
Awesome.
Yeah, Your Good Body is her book.
Mm.
So it's awesome. But anyway,
Cool.
so see you Sunday for that. Thanks for being with us again, ladies. Love you all. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Have a good night.